So, first of all, I just did...
Are we rolling right now?
Yeah, we're rolling right now. So I just did...
Ben Gaum from Project Studio Architects. Project Studio Architects.
That's how we're starting the podcast. We're not clipping that out. As Ben and Max know, I for some reason have like a brain freeze when it comes to not only your last name, because then I spell it wrong and everybody noticed that, and then also that I don't say your company name properly. But
okay.
So welcome.
Ben Gaum from Project Studio Architects.
We just filmed 40. I can't believe, as I said, I'm moving out of my 40s. I'm turning 50 in April. Woot, woot.
Amazing.
Yeah, I know. I'm kind of like pumped for my 50s.
That is a lot, right? Like, I don't know about podcasts, but that's a good amount.
I learned that most of them don't last this long. So I'm not only am I like, I'm very proud of it, but I'm also so humbled that like guests like yourself just keep coming back and hanging out with me. So I really appreciate that. I mean, that's really 90% of it. Me showing up, I'm next door. That's easy. But, having people who come and take their time to come and sit with me, I really appreciate that. So thanks,
fun.
41.
I've loved it from day one. It's 41. Yeah, there you go.
I'm going to tell Darcy to start calling you 41.
Yes, 41.
So I feel like the reason that we also agreed to come together again is because one of the shorts that I posted on TikTok of us reached over 95,000 views. That's right. He is number one. And I feel like he needs to come back now, and he wanted to break his own record.
Come on,
truth be told, the trolls came out in full force because we were talking about the fact that it was really hard to find, it was really hard to find trades north, and that it wasn't cheaper. And just for the record, the only point we were trying to make is that there's a misconception that when you go north, it's cheaper, and it's not. End of story. Like, that's all we were trying to say. And it turned into this, like, we were city idiots and no one wanted us up north. And I was told several times to just sell my cottage and never come back. I don't mean to laugh, but I was like, I just did a podcast.
Yeah, no,
I don't know where all the haters came from, but we were just chatting.
It's just discussion, and it's not. And I actually, I make a very, strong point to myself of like, I have an initiative that's a design build. So I'm essentially now a contractor, but the last thing I want to do is start slighting contractors or bad-mouthing whatever. So I just talk from experience. So as an architect, when I'm up north doing projects, it's like these are the problems that we run into. But the other things that we did say were there's a reason that the price of those contractors are higher, because the skill level is like very, very high. It's...
So my contractor up north just finished, like, honestly building an extension to my shed. Like, I know that sounds so ridiculous, and it was so beautiful. Yeah. Like, the workmanship that Greg did was beautiful. It cost me a fortune for an extension of but it was beautiful. All that to be said, balancing the haters, do you know how many contractors reached out to me and said, if you ever need someone really good up north, like, I'll pass them on to you. They were like, call me. I work in Halliburton. I work in Muskoka. I work whatever. Like, there were people who were like, hey, I'm happy to dispel that myth, and, I'm affordable. So there you go. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about today, but I just really felt like we need to revisit that explosive episode.
We'll get haters for this one too, probably.
Yeah, I'm sure. But this was your suggestion, which I thought was really good, was, laneway houses, garden suites, income properties, the ability to have these 5 units now on a property across the GTA, or Toronto at least. And I've said this to you, like, I'd love to figure out how to, have a garden suite in my backyard. I wish I had a laneway property. But so the question is, now to discuss today is really like, if you're listening and you're very interested and you're thinking about a million things, retirement, income property, rates are going to start coming down. It's going to be a little bit more affordable to borrow money and build, and, who are those people? So yeah, let's get into it.
How do you want to start?
Well, okay, so I own a home. I am lucky enough to be someone who owns a home in Toronto, what's the first thing we have to know if I was going to call you and say, I want to engage with you in your builds of Laneway or garden suites? Like, what is the requirement of my property lines, right? Like, is there a certain minimum or...
Yeah, and I mean, there's probably too many to go into now in detail, in a sort of general sense, but yeah, the first thing you want to do is, a lot of people are trying to interpret the rules themselves, and it's hard enough for the experts to interpret the rules. So it's, the city's getting better though. They're making it a lot more
they have the outline
clear and
online.
concise, and they have the outline online that like the first outline they had online was like not what you see now. So so kudos to the city for continuing to like drive this and continue to make it clearer and the whole thing. So but yeah, we're getting a lot of calls now for, I sort of call them prospectors, right? So it's people who are understanding that like this is a phenomenal, and you can talk to this is a phenomenal time to be looking at property, right? Like the interest rates are still where they are, but they've been stable. So it's, so people at least now know where they stand financially, sort of stability.
Right. There's no expectation that like the Bank of Canada might raise it again.
Right. Like
or
it seems
it's
to be stable. I mean, best case scenario, it comes down. I think if the rates come down, then the bidding wars go up and things go
They're already happening.
Again. Right. So, but now is like a really good time. You can get property for good numbers.
Less than it will be in 6 months. How's that?
Yep.
Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Less than it will be maybe even in 2 or 3 months.
Right.
Yeah.
So people are, we're getting a lot of calls of prospectors saying like, okay, I'm going out there looking for properties to eventually put a garden suite or a laneway house on. So what am I looking for? So I generally tell them, the major ones are the overall size of the lot, right? So basically, for our initiative, because we're using the shipping containers, 2 containers side by side is 16 feet. So for a laneway house, we need to be looking at properties that are like 16 feet minimum in width, which is in Toronto.
Easy.
Yeah, which is pretty.
I mean, there are smaller, but not a ton.
There's not a ton, but they're out there. I've been approached by people because when you're talking about the homes that are on laneways, are typically smaller lots. So I will get calls from people that are like, we found this great lot and it's 15 and a half feet by whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not to say you can't do a laneway suite. It's just we can't do it with our initiative, right? But generally that is on the smallest side. So for laneway houses, you're allowed to go property line to property line.
Right.
The most important dimension is it's not so much, it's a sort of derivative of the length of the lot, right? So the length of the lot, we really want them to be really no shorter than like 120 deep. Because if you start getting into less than 120 deep, the main dimension the city wants to see is the distance between the back of your house and where that laneway house will be, right?
Which is 45 feet still?
It's 5.5 meters if you're doing a 1-story, but typically people are looking for 2 stories. It's 7.5 meters for a 2-story. So 7.5 meters is 20, let's call it 25 feet.
Oh, okay.
So it's 25 feet is that distance.
Less.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was much more.
No. So it's
25 feet is not that much.
It's not that much, but when you're talking like, the difference between a 110-foot lot and a 120-foot lot or 125-foot lot, it's like that's your distance or that's your difference right there.
Well, it's also a difference whether you have a backyard or not.
Right.
I mean, I think those are the things you have to consider, right? Like, what are you using it for? What do you
and I mean
for?
also who you are, right? Know who you are, right? So if it's someone who's living in the house and they want to have a laneway house in the back, you're going to want your backyard and the whole thing. If it's more of an income property, people are less concerned about having a backyard. They're just like, let's have 3 units in the home and...
Very good point, for sure. And then there's people who just like more of an urban setting. Right. They want that office. They just want a little patio in the backyard. Like,
that being said, there is a building code requirement. There's a zoning requirement that says you need to have, in the back lot, you would need to have this much like a percentage of softscape landscaping versus, so
Right, for the sewers and
well,
the
just
runoff?
for water runoff, but also just for, for softscape landscaping to make sure that people aren't just sort of, paving their backyards or having no backyards at all. But I mean, that you sort of get into a Pandora's box of like all these different zoning requirements, the coverage on your lot and all these things. But to sort of break it down to like the first initial one is the lot size, right? So if you're in around, 16 by 120, you're in a good spot. If you're bigger than that, you're almost always, in a really good spot. So that's for a laneway house.
Can I ask you about the laneway? Just because I just had a client who bought a laneway house in the East End, but it wasn't a laneway that you would take a car. Like you could squeeze a car down the laneway, but you couldn't get it into the backyard. It was very tight.
Right.
Right? So you would consider it like almost like a walkway.
Right.
So would that still be considered a laneway, or does it have to actually have a certain depth to the back for you to be able to build that sidewalk?
The laneway has to be a certain width. And technically it will be designated already. So if you get a survey of that property, it will be designated whatever it is, Boone Avenue, Laneway House East, or sort of Laneway East or Laneway South or whatever. It will already be designated as a formal official laneway.
Fair. Okay.
So if
that's missing, that's the red flag.
If that's missing, that's a red flag, because we have looked into stuff like that. Usually if there's sort of, if there's a walkway or sometimes it's even like, a private drive that goes through a series of homes. We looked at a property like that in the East End, and it turns out on the survey, each person actually their lots extended. They didn't even know this until we analyzed the survey, but their lots extended into the middle of that driveway, which means each person owned a chunk of that. So it wasn't
the city is the Wild West.
Yeah, I mean, so it wasn't officially a laneway, right? So we couldn't really approach it that way. So, so for laneway houses, that's what you want to be. For garden suites, it's different. The biggest obstacle, I think, for both laneway houses and garden suites is what's called the 45-degree angular plane, right? So the city
that down.
So, okay. So if I wish I had like a whiteboard here so I could break down. So basically the city is requiring that, wherever your setback is. So for a garden suite, for example, you can't go lot line to lot line. You have to have setbacks on the sides, setbacks on the front and the back.
Okay.
So the 45
of the garden suite
of the property line.
Okay.
Right. So the property line, you would have a setback that says you can't build
right.
within.
From the garden suite, though. Yeah. There's a setback from your property line.
Right.
And how many feet is that?
It actually depends, because it's a percentage. It's 10% of the lot width.
Okay.
Right? So, a 50-foot lot would be, 5 feet setback from the sides type thing, right?
That's a lot.
It is, but on a 50-foot lot, it works. Like, you can still get a really nice garden. So we were actually doing a proposal right now for a huge 1,200 square foot garden suite on that exact, like a 50 by 140 lot. So it works.
Really?
Yeah. But the 45-degree angular plane is, wherever that setback is, the city then wants you to draw an imaginary line up 4.5 meters, 13, 14 feet.
Yeah.
And then you draw this imaginary 45-degree line, and your building can't cross through that line. All right. So you can't build within that 45-degree angular zoning envelope.
And that's only for garden suites?
On all four sides for garden suites. On the laneway house, it's only the setback from that one I was talking about, from the back of your house.
Okay.
That's 7.5 meters.
Uh-huh.
You go up 4.5 meters with an imaginary line, then drive your 45-degree angle, and your building can't cross over. Can't cross over that.
If I'm understanding that correctly, is that why a lot of them are flat roof?
So I mean, that's having a flat roof is easily the best way of eliminating that.
Okay. Because there's nothing worse than going into a house, and I've been through an old, usually older houses where you get to the second floor and you're like, I can only stand up.
Right. Okay. So
in the middle of the room.
So you bring up a good. We're sort of digressing a bit, but but you're right. Like if you go around and start analyzing the shapes of these laneway houses, you'll start to see like, oh, there's like weird angle roofs.
Right.
They're not like sort of your typical peaked roofs. It's
Right.
because they're following that 45-degree angular plane. The problem with conventional framing is that building a flat roof is easily double, the cost of building a conventional peaked roof.
Right, but you're
And-
doing it with containers.
I'm doing it with containers, so it's like, but the other problem you run into with a peaked roof or a flat roof versus a peaked roof is, there's a lot more potential for failure, right? So on a flat roof, I'm sure out of the 95,000 people that will watch this, that at least 50,000 of them will be like, oh yeah, I know someone who had like their flat roof
Every
leak
time I have a
and-
client who calls me to list a house and I show up and there's a flat roof, I'm like, when was the last time you had your roof done? Because when I
Exactly.
get the home inspector in, right? Like,
and
it is.
it's
Don't do a flat roof.
It's a real thing. You don't do a flat roof except if you're doing it in, I don't know, shipping containers or something where it's, that's the beauty of our system, not to digress again. But, our system with the shipping containers is that they are inherently totally sealed. Like no water can get in the top of a shipping container. It's just, it's impossible, right? So, and even on top of that, we build a roof.
I was just going to say, do you do a roof?
We build a roof, but it's a very
aesthetic.
simple, it's not even for aesthetic. It's just a very simple roof just to shed water, because as an architect, you're just taught that like you can't have standing water. Even if I have a box that's completely sealed, I'm not just going to let water sit on that roof. So we just build a very simple roof that just slopes the water off, and that's it. So it's not like a built-up flat roof, right? So, but yeah, when I go around and I see, when I see a lot of these laneway houses and they're being built with flat roofs,
You're like, okay.
I'm like, call me in 5 years or...
So we had the requirements for a laneway suite, which are... There's quite a few of them, but it depends on where you live. So there's not everybody. Jury of one here, I've always been very interested in. We've talked about like garden suite. So I don't know, but I think I have a 45 by 130. So what are the requirements on a lot for a garden suite?
So you'd be actually totally fine. I mean, you could put, again, depending on how much of the backyard you wanted to eat up. Typically, laneway houses and garden suites are typically in and around, and again, it's a sort of a biased response because we're using shipping containers. So the shipping containers are 20 feet deep. But I think in general, that 20-foot depth is another good way of thinking of it, as being like, okay, if this is my backyard, I go to the back of the backyard, come off about 3 or 4 feet or 5 feet for a garden suite and just measure 20 feet.
To the house? Or
no, just 20 feet from the back of the lot.
Okay.
So measure 25 feet from the back of the lot.
Yeah,
and that's where your garden suite would sit. Mm-hmm. And you sort of just mark that line and sit back and sort of picture like, is this a good size for my lot, right? Because I would end up with this much backyard. Is that okay with me? Yes or no?
But is that also garden suites can't be two levels?
No, they can.
They can be.
Yeah.
So what are the requirements there? Because
So
ultimately you're like overlooking your neighbor's backyard too.
Yeah,
right?
well that's why there's this 45-degree angular plane from all four sides. Right. So to get that 45-degree angular plane, you're probably going to have more than like a 3 or 4 or even a 5-foot setback from the back and from the sides, right? So usually around 5 feet is good.
Okay.
If you're just going up sort of, again, our shipping containers, the overall height of ours is 19 feet because they're 9.5 feet high.
Right.
But that's shy of what you're allowed. Like the maximum you're allowed height is 6.5 meters. So if you are going up that 6.5 meters, you're going to need to be further away from the property lines to be able to meet
So
that
you really
45
do
degree.
need, like, because it would end up feeling like you've got two houses on one lot with nothing else, right? Like, I mean, because then you need, I'm just thinking about practically like using my property as an example. Like by the time I have my deck and I've gotten off my deck and I'm like, there's like a strip of grass and then I've got the...
Yeah, well, that's it. And that's why everybody, that's why there's, countless properties that would allow for it. But it's obviously not for everybody, right? Like, and not
think
everybody wants, the idea of income is great, but not everybody wants like someone living in their backyard, right? So you have to know yourself first and foremost, right? So
that's a very good point. In fact, I remember when I had the honor of being on BT, and the hosts, they prepare you with all the questions ahead of time. So like I must have memorized every possible word I was going to say because I thought I was going to vomit from being on live TV. And then at the end, he throws a question that we didn't discuss. And I was like, but not that I didn't know, but he said, well, what's the downside? And all I could think was, wait a second, you did not clear that with me. But the first thing I said was, do you want to have someone living in your backyard? Yeah. I mean, that's one. And two, do you want to be a landlord, which is a whole other podcast. But do you want someone like exactly living in your backyard? Yeah. I mean, I think to myself, and I've talked about it with you on our podcast, is I love this idea of just talking about it in condos, and that idea of our parents' generation when they could sell their house and buy a condo and have this huge delta of money that they could put aside and live off of in retirement. And that's not the case anymore, right?
No, it's not.
At all. Yeah. So I love this idea, and not a lot of people are doing it, but more people should who have Laneway is build that Laneway house, live in it, and rent your property.
Yeah, there's a bunch of people doing that.
I think it's genius. Yeah. So I think to myself as I turn 50 this year. This year, yeah. In April. Happy birthday to me. Is, do I, would that be such a cool idea? But I don't have a Laneway property. And then I think, how the hell am I going to sell that house when I go to sell it? Yeah. It's like, come meet my house and the other house that's in the backyard. Like, not everybody wants that as a single family house.
Yeah. I mean, something that I've been looking into personally myself is, if you look at, let's call it $1 million property, right? So you're looking at just like a nice, either a bungalow, but let's call it a bungalow. So we're talking just under $1 million, right?
Yeah,
so,
sure.
Or in my neighborhood and the Corso Italian neighborhood, if you can find a property for $1 million, right? So $1 million, you're putting down, what is it? Would it be 250,000 or 200,000 or?
Is it an investment property?
It's an investment property.
Yeah, so 20%.
Right. So you're putting down your 250,000, and then you're building a Laneway house for 400,000. So if you can, come up with the 600,000,
drop in the bucket.
And then I mean, everybody's got that, right?
Yeah.
But then all you have to do is come up with the down payment of that house, because the rent will cover the rest, right? Like the rent will cover everything. It'll just be, I don't know if it works by just having a property, with a bungalow on it that you're renting the main floor and maybe the basement. But as soon as you put a Laneway house on there, you're getting enough rent from those three properties, like a lot of rent from those three units that you can turn that over way quicker. But then just having that income property with sort of the two incomes on it, right? Because
I agree with you, and in fact, I've had this conversation with investor clients where, like from an ease standpoint, as like a single investor versus someone who owns multiples, I've said to clients, you know what, buy one house, a bungalow, rent it to one family. I said, you'll be asking for trouble if you do like a basement suite and an upstairs, because this one's too loud, this one's doing the laundry in the middle of the night, whatever, fine. Yeah. But the reality is that if you have two suites, you're making more money. Okay, that's the reality. Yeah. So now you put another suite on.
But it amplifies not only in financially, but just in sort of desirability of, if you have a Laneway house, someone's living in a totally separate condition from that other person. There's nobody above them, there's nobody below them, there's no...
Well, and also like the entrance out to the Laneway, they're not even dealing with the backyard.
It's like it's the cachet of it is so huge, and
depending on the way that you structure it, you can give all of them access to the backyard. It could just be the main floor. They could, all of those things. Yeah. Plus they also have, sometimes the basement doesn't get doesn't have like ensuite laundry, you would do that in the laneway. So for sure, listen, I've said to clients also, like, who don't have a great basement, spend the $150,000 to underpin your basement, make a great basement. I said, yes, you have to borrow even if you have to borrow the $150,000, the rent will cover it, pay it off. And you're making money, and in the that'll get paid off eventually. And now you're making, and you've got, as we know, affordability. You get a lot. I've seen homes that have that basement apartment get sold, like they sell for more.
Yeah.
Because people want in, they can't afford it, and they use it. I put clients recently, like we had to find a property that had a basement apartment because we weren't going to be able to do it.
That's literally when we bought our house, how we got into the market. We found a place that had a basement apartment, and it just helped subsidize until the point where
until you don't need it anymore. It's not. It doesn't have to be permanent, but it helps in those early years when money is tight, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, to circle back, like I'd say, like with clients, even in my sort of traditional side of the architectural practice, like I'm always encouraging them to write out like a wish list, right? So, and you can do this with laneways and garden suites as well, right? So sort of you have your wish lists, and then you sort of you follow it up with a list of pros and cons, right? Or just all those things, like, and I think as an architect, that's what we're really looking for potential clients to come to us with. Like, I wouldn't even try to get mired in the craziness of trying to go through all the zoning requirements yourself and trying to figure it out and whatever.
No.
Just know those basic elements, and just know those basic elements of like, okay, a garden suite or a laneway house are typically going to be like 20 feet deep. So you go out in your backyard and you measure 20 feet, and you can sort of see it. And okay, do I want a backyard? Do I not want a backyard? Do I want a 1-story unit, or do I want a 2-story unit? Just these general things that you can sort of mark off to start the exploration.
I have to say, I think with the interest rates, I'm willing it coming down. I think those ideas will come back to people as options as they start to think about doing more work in their house and their longer term, right?
And again, it doesn't have to be seen as a singular thing, right? Like it doesn't have to be seen as, okay, I'm putting this there and then it's going to become this rental income play, thing. And do I want to be a landlord? Do I not? It's like, if you build it, you can do anything you want with it.
You can put your elderly parents in it.
I've actually had that question a bunch of times where people say, like, once I build it as a laneway suite, like it's locked in as a laneway, like I have to rent it out. And I'm like, no. It's you could store your.
It could be a shed.
It could be a shed for all you want. Like you can do whatever you want with it. It doesn't have to. Yeah. So I think I was sort of shocked at how many people didn't understand that.
Well, for sure.
But yeah, like it can literally be anything you want at any time you want. If you have it as a rental property, and then one day you decide, I'm gonna go it on my own and I need my own office space. So it becomes your office space. Or
for sure. As we learned in COVID, life is a moving target.
Exactly, right? So yeah.
Thanks for coming on and talking a little bit more about the specifics.
Yeah.
As the two of us, we should just do like a laneway suite podcast.
We should.
Yeah. I wonder how many people would watch. I feel like we're like the two that really the 95,000. All right, well, we're gonna check this one out and see how many people. Although I don't think we were as controversial as last time.
Oh right.
But we'll see.
Do we want to get controversial? What do we want to?
Yeah. No. God. No. No. And no. Okay. Thank you.